Yes.
There we go. Good morning, Nikolai.
Um,
Good morning to those of you who are joining us on Zoom and on YouTube. Welcome to Humanity First Chats with Nikolai and Takima. For a public service announcement, we are letting you know that it is Friday, June 4th, 2021, in case you are watching us live. Again, if you're watching us after the fact on our YouTube channel, good luck with figuring out the day. This week's topic, we're going to be doing some conversations about what we are calling hot topics. We know that every day feels like a week, every week feels like a month. So it's been 2 weeks since we had our last chat. And so much has happened in the news, in the world, and also in our lives. And so we just kind of, as we've been touching bases over the past couple of weeks, Nikolai and I just decided let's bring it to the chat and share our thoughts with you and hear from you and process and breathe together this morning towards the end of our session. So you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have gone recently, we were doing some maintenance, but it should be back up shortly. I did get a couple of reach outs from folks saying, I listened to Humanity First over the weekend and I went and I didn't see any videos, but it will be back momentarily. So thank you for liking, subscribing, giving us comments, and for joining us however you choose to. So I'm Takima, president and founder of Anasa Educational Consulting. I am a very, very long time educator, professional development provider, activist doula, mom, and licensed Zumba instructor, which I'm still vibing on. Nikolai, who are you?
yes, I am Nikolai, and yes, still vibing off of that wonderful Zumbaing. It's right. Yes, I am Nikolai. I am the author of Ring the Alarm. I'm a parenting consultant, unschooling advocate, forest school director, um, and all of those wonderful things. I know. Takima, I am looking at the forest school site, which is, and we're doing a lot of work in the moment for the summer, and so it looks like a whole lot of things. But yeah, this
You're like looking at like out your window at this forest school itself.
yes, and so the forest school was me taking over my backyard and turning it into an outdoor exploration place for children in my neighborhood who normally do not have time or not so much time, but the ability to explore outdoor spaces in with free play and self-directed in a self-directed way. And so I converted that into a forest school as well as a permaculture installation. And so I am looking at it over the summer. We're overhauling it and installing our beds and our chicken coop and all kinds of crazy and well, wonderful, yummy things.
I sense another road trip, Nikolai. I want to see it since I saw it in the very beginning. It was like fresh idea beginning to come to life, but this is so exciting and so wonderful. We could talk. We should actually do a whole Humanity First chat about this process, actually.
And about forest school, it's very important. I think we should.
Okay, cool. Never will we want to run out of topics.
Not between us for sure.
No, oh my goodness, I know. Again, like, why are we sending each other memes like right before Humanity First? So funny. So we're gonna move into the space holding, and I think that like kind of this whole chat is gonna be about space holding, um, because there has been a lot. Do you want to start us off, Nikolai?
Yes, well, first to frame it for those of you that are not familiar, during this time we usually hold space for victims or people who have been victimized, rather, by state violence or some form of violence um, because of the system of systemic racism, the system of white supremacy, the framework, and all of the ways that it shows up and victimizes people. And so usually this is what we do in this space because we tend to ignore it or try to put it in the back of our heads in order to to be able to cope and live our daily lives, and we're unaware that we're still holding that grief because there's no way that we can hear about these things in the news and then be completely unaffected. And so we hold space here so that we can bring attention to it, so that we can do or honor those names and those lives, and we can move collectively through that grief. Um, but for this particular chat, um, we're doing it a little bit differently. One of We're holding space for the children who were recently found at a residential boarding school in Canada, and we actually want to not just hold space for the 200 plus children that were found, but out of that, two parents or grandparents, nieces, nephews, cousins, would be nieces, nephews, cousins, neighbors, and entire families that are broken over this. And this is just one school. And so we want to hold space for a moment, but then in addition to that, we want to speak on the issue just a bit. So let's do that now.
Oh goodness, it's so heavy, so heavy, but so necessary. I want to read images that are on the slides. They are screenshots from an Instagram account who the woman's name is native in underscore LA. And um, they say the image on the left says residential boarding schools. Wear orange, lower your flags. These schools existed in Canada, the US, Mexico, New Zealand, Australia, Hawaii, and many more places where Indigenous peoples were forced to choose and be stripped of their culture and traditions. We need action. We need justice. We need to bring home our stolen relatives. We need to ensure a future that is Indigenous, that it is free from this trauma and injustice. And those words are by Jordan Daniel. And there's a smaller image on this image which says, we honor the lives and spirits of the 215 innocent children who were recently discovered on the property of the Kamloops Residential School. So it was a call to wear orange on May 31st for these children. And then on the right, there's a second image on this slide, also from the same Instagram account, native in underscore LA. Residential/boarding schools. We must address this issue and call for a search on all boarding and residential schools property to bring them back to their communities and send them off in a good way. We must demand accountability from the government who created this cultural genocide and recognize that this injustice is still happening within the child welfare system. Also, words by Jordan Daniel. And then there's one more section. Someone, I believe, either on Instagram or Twitter, Shay, LAOH, wrote also, this isn't just history. The residential school system was replaced by the child welfare system here in Canada. So these are Canadian folks speaking to this experience, but please recognize that there were residential schools here in the US, all across the US as well. And I think we have an image of that coming up. Can go to the next slide, please, Joe. So we had also resources to share. And so we will put these, the Instagram account into the links into YouTube and Zoom so you can check out. There are books, podcasts, and there's a call to watch Vice TV's program, Indigenous Peoples in Canadian Residential Schools. There's also things that we can share about reading about and watching about in residential schools here in the US, particularly the Truth and Reconciliation process that has happened in Maine. It was a very powerful documentary and very painful.
Yeah, Takima, to add to that, what I want to share, or we want to share, is that really this is about erasure and a continued erasure in this particular case, in this particular instance about the erasure of death. You can't just find children that were missing. You don't just find 215 children. People knew about them. And we have to be very aware of how the media and just history and these structures of power will erase our living and erase our dead and erase the violence that is a part of colonial structure here and abroad and globally, and in the past and in the present. Anytime that you have any colonial structure, if you're not explaining it in the context of violence and genocide, then you're not doing it right. And so it's this erasure of people, erasure of history, erasure of actual events that is a part of the power structure and a part of colonialism that we have to resist, and we have to continue to, as we raise children, because we created Humanity First for caregivers and parents of the young. And so all of us have an obligation, to a moral an obligation, to teach our children differently and not be complicit in our own lack of understanding or awareness. And so, yes, we hold space and we grieve, but also we become informed and we teach.
Absolutely. And I was struck by something. Was reading posts online about this, a lot of so much pain to witness from Indigenous folks. Obviously, it's so much, this is a trigger. People who themselves went to, were taken or stolen to, residential schools are alive. And so, it brought up so much trauma, re-trauma for them and their families. And I remember I read a post where one person was sharing his story and it was horrendous, horrific. And, I looked at the comments because I'm like, I don't know. You're not supposed to read the comments, but, I did because there were a lot of supportive ones. There was one comment where one person said, I don't know if I believe this. This just seems so crazy. This can't really be true. And I just thought, like, the reason why you can say that is because right, someone has lived a life where you have not been told the truth your whole life. So then when confronted with actual truth, it seems ludicrous. it seems, of course, somebody's lying. How could this be true? And also, you will only think about it in an isolated case, right? You'll say, this is this one person, perhaps they had a bad experience, but have no understanding of a connection to systems and history and layers and generations of trauma, et cetera, et cetera. So when you think, when we, you mentioned, Nikolai, talking with our children and how we raise our children, if we don't raise them with some sense of truth, right, in developmentally appropriate ways, but also help them start to make connections to systems, they will grow up to become adults that just like don't believe it. It can't be true.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
I think we have this of idealizing systems, idealizing this narrative of history that has been presented to us since childhood, right? So, a part of the tool, and one of the reasons that I'm so pro homeschooling and unschooling, is that a part of the tool uses is a public compulsory education system to feed a narrative of history and to see itself, the government, and all of the systems that it put in place as the hero, as the savior, as the doer of good. That is what the system does, and so we become wired to believe that, and we the same system that you're taught, all of this patriotism and all of these narratives cannot possibly be the system that put these structures in place, that put these boarding schools in place, that put the reservations in place, that did what it has done to people of African descent, Black people in this country. And so you just don't believe it. But we know better, we know differently, and so we have to fight through that. We have to fight through that programming, and then we have an obligation to just teach our children differently. And absolutely, these schools existed. That was just one school, and there is a long, long history and well documented history of Indigenous people telling their story. And we always say you have to believe the people who endured and not the creators of the narratives that we have been fed. And so believe Native people, believe Indigenous people. Um,
That was so powerful, that statement that you just made, like, because you can apply it to every like group or every identity that's talking about their oppression, right? So yeah, thank you for that. Um, so just to point out that there were definitely boarding schools in settler colonial USA. So this is another Instagram post. I can't see that so well. So can you, Nikolai, just read out the Instagram feed?
Yeah, erasure is insidious and speaks to the anti-indigeneity. The knowledge and resources are there. Countless indigenous people and scholars like Vinay Deloria, Dr. Gregory Cajede, Dr. Joseph Suna of Cochoti Pueblo, and many others have paved a way for addressing this work. Please continue to see our people, our history, and our right to be here. The Native American Boarding School Coalition for Healing started several years back, and the Instagram account on that is at NABSHC. Um, and thank you for the First Nations of the Settler Colonial Canada for all the leadership and work and shining that's shining currently. And then there's a list. So this is a multi-slide post, and there's about 6 slides to it. And this is from Indigenous teachers, one of my favorite Indigenous educators, one of my favorite accounts on Instagram as it relates to Indigenous educators and people. So we hope
Thank you.
that you
I
guys.
also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, we hope that you get these resources in your hands. There are things for both. Also, in Native in under also has a list of podcasts and books. So we hope that you get into it. There's stuff for both adults and for children of different ages.
Definitely. And I just wanted to share that I put two things in the chat here on Zoom, and we'll get them over to the YouTube. One is an article that is by Next City on nextcity.org, what truth and reconciliation looks like in practice. And they discuss Black Lives Matter as well as Indigenous reparations or unnoticing or understanding of boarding school, of residential experiences. And then the other thing I put was dawnland.org, DAWNLAND.org, which is the documentary that is talking about the folks and having truth and reconciliation around the residential school. So Joe just pulled up the website. We can see, Joe, thank you. Really, really tough to watch. I watched it a few years ago and I couldn't do it in one sitting. It was incredibly, incredibly moving and painful. And we have to bear witness because, right, observing and educating others and being activists in the work is nothing compared to what these children endured and the impact that it's had on the rest of their lives and their families. So it really is our work. And then on the next slide, we had one last thing to share related to this. Obviously, there's so much more we could continue talking about, but there was a book that was recommended, I believe on one of the Instagram feeds I was looking at, Broken Circle, The Dark Legacy of Indian Residential Schools, which is the memoir by a person named Theodore Fontaine. And then on the right side of the slide is a partial view of a map of Canada, and there are little black dots all around it. Now we could see the full map, the magic of Joe. Thank you, behind the scenes. Map, little dots of residential schools all across Canada. And so there are many, maybe, I don't know, what would you say, hundreds? Maybe at least 100, it looks like. And that's just Canada, the Canada part of North America. And so if we were to add the United States, it would probably be triple this many schools. And so just think about it, 215 children died in one of these schools in Canada. Others lived, and just the amount of people that have been impacted by this is just, it's staggering to consider. We will drop the link to this map again into the chat so you could take a look and learn more as you are able.
And Takima, yes, if we look at the US map, it's probably three times that. And we just want to again say that these children died because they were taken and they died of child abuse, and they that was hidden. And it's that same violence, right? So that is that same spirit, that same violence, that same mentality is with us and has been with us. And so we have to speak to it in that way. And when as we approach truth and reconciliation, or as we support people in truth in that process, we have to again you know approach it with that same energy.
Yes. One thing I was thinking too is that, this work is so powerful and ever evolving. And you think about the invisibility that the society puts upon Native people, right? Asian people, right? So you think, right, invisibility. And then you have something like this happen, and we're like holding all this pain, and we have so few opportunities to like experience the joy and the full humanity and the lives and the contributions of Native people in, larger society. So this just makes me really feel so much more committed to lifting Native voices all the time, because it feels hard to talk so much about Indigenous folks in terms of, fighting for water, fighting for. I mean, this is a lot, right? So it's like a thought. I'm just thinking for myself about how I show up as well.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, we definitely should do more of that. And I know a couple of years, my son was speaking to me, and maybe like 3 years ago, he was kind of young, and he was just like, I didn't know we went to like a reservation and we met some indigenous people, and he was just like, I didn't know that they were still here. And they absolutely are still here. There's language, culture, people every single day, every single all over this country, all over Canada. And so the we can do a whole thing about like how the language that we have and the narratives that we have framed around things like the loss of the Mohican, the loss of this, the loss of that. And so we frame things as if they were completely, gone, and they're not gone. They're very much here.
Big time, big time.
So moving on, and I love what you did with the mail chat, by the way. Moving on, speaking about erasure, and this is why this is such an important connection because erasure is a colonial structure, and erasure itself is violence. And so we have come to the 100-year anniversary of the Tulsa massacre. And just now, is it even getting the attention in mainstream history and media um, that it merits? It is the largest domestic terrorist event. Um, it was an event that lasted 8 hours. It was from May 31st to June 1st. Um, and so a little bit about it. It was a white mob of white residents, and it's important that we understand that they were weaponized by the city first, and then joined by thousands of other citizens that looted and burned over 35 blocks of Black businesses and residences to the ground. Over 1,200 houses were burned. Others were just looted. Papers, schools, library, hospitals, churches, hotels, stores, etc., were also burned. At the beginning, as we often see, it was reported that only like 13 deaths had happened. And this is, again, a weapon of minimizing violence and minimizing the things that happened to us. But historians have estimated that as high as 300 died. Um, and for almost 6 decades, I believe, there was a total media blackout. So there was absolutely zero coverage in papers and newspaper, any of it. And just over the last maybe 40 years, some coverage here and there, but not on a mainstream platform. It's not in our history books as it relates to public schools. And so this is something that right now obviously needs to be changed, but it's the same violence. It's the same spirit, it's the same systems, it's the same level of erasure. And so I don't think, and this is me on the spiritual side, I don't think it's a coincidence that we see both this anniversary and news of this indigenous massacre and genocide cover up come out at the same time. I do believe that we're still in this portal of truth and of shifts um, that I believe we entered last year. And it is very important for us to continue to apply pressure, to continue to experience, to see it for what it is, and to use it as fuel to continue to fight, not to feel defeated, but to fight because we're fighting for all of our ancestors and all of our brothers and sisters who were erased and we're not. I don't want to say we're not fought for because we have always, resistance has always been part of our history and we have always fought. But these voices that on a mass level have been silenced. And it's just wrong. So we want to take just a few minutes also. 5 breaths and hold space for these 300 lives and all of the brothers and the sisters and the parents and the grandparents. Because it's never just one life, it is exponential impact. It is dreams and contributions lost. Now, this book is a book. It's a children's book. It's a children's picture book, and it's beautifully done, and one that should be a part of all libraries, all home libraries, because our stories are important. We've also shared in the chat different documentaries that you can watch and series that you can watch that are currently in rotation as in regards to this massacre. And we hold space because it is necessary, and it's painful, and it's all a part of our collective grief, but we refuse erasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw this really interesting article. It was an interview with Dr. Robin G. Kelly, and I just put it into the chat. I think it's really powerful because it frames the bigger systemic and like capitalist white supremacist issues, or like, sort of framing around Tulsa. And so I wanted to read one paragraph of it to you. It's really long and it's really good. So Dr. Kelly says, the fact is, the Tulsa Race Massacre is the most thoroughly studied and discussed incident of all of the 20th century racial pogroms, with the exception of the East St. Louis Massacre of 1917. I've been in the business of teaching Black history for over 3 decades, and every colleague I know includes Tulsa in their general survey courses. So why do we continually repeat the assertion that this history is completely unknown, a secret, or so shameful that no one wants to talk about it? Because the issue has never been about not knowing. It is about a refusal to acknowledge genocidal, state sanctioned racist violence in the United States, a refusal to recognize the existence of fascism in this country. This is not to say the violence is simply denied by the status quo. No, rather, it is disavowed by the white propertied and political classes and displaced onto, quote, ignorant racist workers. This narrative obscures how the violence, fomented and promoted by the press and business interests, became a pretext to take the land, an attempted land grab that continued for decades after 1921. So as you start to learn more, you realize that the land that Tulsa, that this, Greenwood, where Black folks were living, was valuable land, and they were doing so well. And so, if you watch some of the documentaries, you see that people started to notice, and they saw Black people dressing in furs and wearing really nice things. There was actually a lot of footage that were in some of these documentaries, which was incredible. I had never seen that. And so they were like, what is going on over there? And also how they spoke about it. Like I saw newspaper clippings and they were like, you know, the lazy Negroes, they're doing drugs, they're doing all this kind of stuff. And then you contrast it with the actual footage of people like not doing anything like that and being very prosperous and family oriented. And the children in these videos were so powerful to me because they looked, I think, they looked like in a community. They looked healthy. They looked like so, I don't know, there was just a light in their eyes. And it was really beautiful to see them moving because it was images, it was video, black and white video. So just like keep educating ourselves, because I think one of the really important parts is to note that the mob of people were weaponized. And so what we're saying is this was not, it was individual. Of course, it was individual acts of racism and violence. But when you have the police and you have the government standing back and saying, go ahead, here are the weapons, we're going to give it to you, and then we're going to join you. Now you've got an institutional acts of racism and you've got systemic acts of racism. And that's how they all work together. We should be really, really clear about that. Um, yes, the documentary, we'll put that back in there for you, Keisha. You were dropping a lot of links in there because it's just we have to keep educating ourselves. So
And it's very similar to, I think sometimes when we make racism this vague thing, right? We love, it's very self-serving to the system to make racism this vague thing, but it is very concrete. It's not about feelings, it's not about bias, it's about oppression, it's about genocide, it's about land, it's about economic structure. And so it is important for us as we do this work to not let this be about, oh, well, racism is like what, this cookie cutter, like, you know, masticated version of what racism is, and make it about, oh, what people think and feel because of the way other people look. And that is, we have to understand that that too is a weapon for us to not hold these systems accountable. And so very similar to the residential schools. This is about genocide. This is about systemic oppression, but this is about also about economic structures. It was about taking that land. It's about taking this land. It's about colonialism and what it does. Colonialism is violent and takes over and robs and steals and kills everything that was there before or everything that is out of that structure. And that's it. That's the only way that we can define colonialism in the past, in the present, as a global force that it is. And so it's just a job to really internalize it so that we can dismantle it. All right.
so much to learn all the time, so much to process, and it's a lot. So, you know, we do it in small bites, and doing it in community helps to just like think through our questions and to like teach each other and hold each other. So I'm grateful for this space and for, you know, our ongoing communications, Nikolai, and sharing. So thank you. We are going to, since it's been heavy for 40 minutes at 8 a.m. on a Friday, we're gonna move into Meme Central.
Yeah, and we promise everyone that we do have a lighter version of Humanity First. We always ended by centering humanity. So, Meme Central, Tikima.
So y'all, people are gonna make me feel old because sometimes I find things that are so funny, and then I realize like, oh, this was my generation, and some people are not in my generation. But every male cicada in my neighborhood right now. So this is really funny because I mean, I don't, do you have cicadas where you are? Did they come? Did they get up by you?
People keep talking about them. Come to the laboratory in Forest School. There are no cicadas here.
Okay. Yeah, we don't, I mean, I haven't seen any here, but I have like family and friends in like Maryland, DC area, and they said that it's crazy that the police departments are getting phone calls about people's alarms going off, and like people's like somebody's alarm's been going off for 2 days straight now, and they're like, no, it's the cicadas. I'm like, what? That is so crazy. Um, so if any of us remember the 80s and holding up, I feel too old now. Um,
It's,
but I do, huh?
I think it's hilarious that you're this tickled by the image.
Yeah, showing my age. And then don't forget to drink water and get sun. You're basically a house plant with complicated emotions.
Yeah. And for all of those people here in Atlanta, I missed the part of COVID where there was no traffic. It is insane.
Speaking from someone in New York City, I can also say that as a driver here. And also, I would say I missed the part of COVID where there was actual street parking because we have now gone back to sometimes having to wait an hour or two to get a parking spot in our
Sonia in the chat says the same.
in Chicago, Sonia. What are we gonna do? I don't want COVID back like the way it was a year ago, but I really liked how the city emptied out. It was beautiful. Um,
Yeah, let's remember that we should work remote.
yeah, but then it's like terrible because literally the amount of conversations that we have in my family about whether or not we should like drive or like go somewhere. Sometimes we're like, oh no, forget it. Like, no, just because who wants to wait an hour and a half for parking? It's crazy. So I know there's people watching that be like, well, you shouldn't drive. You have a bike. You shouldn't, bike everywhere, walk or whatever, public transportation. You don't know what's going on in people's lives where sometimes they cannot comfortably access those things. And so don't judge. So,
More meme central, maybe.
yeah. All right. I think we have one more on memes, right?
I think we do.
Oh, gosh.
So we've all played Dish, Drain, Jenga, don't lie. It's just like Jenga. There's like one piece of like a pan and then a bowl and then something else, like all of these dishes, and we're just like praying to God in any name and all of them that it doesn't collapse. This is may or may not be my current situation. I will not reveal
It
this.
literally looks like a picture of what my this train looks like right now.
Yeah. And so the middle one, there's a middle by side of Outkast, the rap group, and it says from 1992 to 2006, 14 years, 6 Grammys, studio albums, countless songs that slap. And then on the right, it has a picture. This is also to centralize this. This is in Stone Mountain in Georgia, and also Outkast is a part of it's from Atlanta based. And so it says the Confederacy lasted from 1860 to 1865. There's 5 years, 0 Grammys, 0 studio albums, 0 songs that slap. This means that Outkast is a bigger part of American history than the Confederacy. We should have more Outkast statues everywhere and get rid of all Confederate monuments. There's a huge the biggest, I believe, Confederate monument, which really it's it's in Stone Mountain, is in Georgia, but it's just a disgrace that it would take a natural resource as important
And they didn't even win, right? Asia, right?
as Stone Mountain, and that we would carve that out for this monument is a disgrace as a country.
Mhm.
So we agree to whoever did all of this research and put this beautiful meme together.
Mhm.
The next meme is somebody doing a tip on Twitter, tip for younger folks in the workforce. When you take PTO, anticipate how it will impact the team and try as hard as possible to minimize any disruption. And realize that there are going to be times that you just shouldn't take PTO. And then somebody replied and said, one, take your PTO. Two, without any guilt. Three, turn off email, Slack, everything. Four, no really. Five, if it turns out that your manager doesn't know how to keep your team running smoothly without you, start job hunting. And so we thought it was wonderful. We agree. And that moves us right to our topic that we're going to close out with. I some time ago I wrote a poem and about women's work. And one of the lines was the soles on our feet are tired. Souls written SOULS, um, because they are. And so, Takima, you want to share this?
Yes, I was pulling up on my phone. So I saw this yesterday and I was like, okay, so this is perfect to lead us into this part of our conversation. So on Twitter, someone whose Twitter name is Queen Wanhida, I will put her or their Twitter in the chat, wrote a thread. And so the beginning says, apparently during World War II in Greenville, South Carolina, Black women decided to be stay-at-home moms to their own kids while their husbands were at war, meaning they stopped being housekeepers and nannies to white families. And they hated this so much, meaning the white families, that they complained to the city council. When you go to read the thread, I mean, I guess you probably shouldn't be surprised, but it's also surprising at the same time just to kind of see it on paper. So this is a newspaper clipping, and the title of it says, Negro women to be put to work. City ordinance soon be passed requiring them to be regularly employed. Many complaints, and just the beginning of it. Regardless of whether they want to or have to, able-bodied Negro women in Greenville who are not regularly employed are to be put to work, put in jail, or fined heavily. At its special meeting yesterday afternoon, City Council discussed the situation with regard to this class of loafers at some length, and it seemed that all members of council were agreed that steps should be taken to compel them to engage in some useful occupation. It was decided that an ordinance similar to the one now in force requiring all able-bodied men to work at least 5 days per week should be passed with regard to these women. Such an ordinance will be prepared and voted on at a next regular meeting of the council. And so this is what they're saying. A number of complaints have come to members of the Council of Negro Women who are not at work and who refuse employment when it's offered to them. The result being that it is exceedingly difficult for families who need cooks and laundresses to get them. Wives of colored soldiers getting a monthly allowance from the government have, a number of them, declined to work on the ground that they can get along without working, according to reports. Others have flatly refused jobs without giving any reason whatsoever, while still others pretend that they are employed when, as a matter of fact, they derive a living from illegitimate means. And so then just goes on to basically, they're going to rigidly enforce the law to make these Black women going back to serving families. Right.
Yeah, this is incredibly, I mean, we know pieces of this history, but it's so painful that Black women have been denied their humanity, over and over again. And it explains in so many ways, or it's one of the ways that it explains our conflicting emotions with rest and with work. And it's so layered. And I do want to say that a lot of times, particularly with Black women, in um, that that we understand really that a lot of the emotions and a lot of the ideas that um, where there's a conflict of rest and there's a programming of glorifying or thinking that you must continue to work. Understand that that didn't just happen, that's not just there, that there's a historic event in many, many historic events that preceded that programming. And so when we say that rest is resistance, we we really do mean that. And so, yeah.
So deep. I was sitting there like, wow, there's so much here to unpack. I mean, so much here to unpack, but just also thinking back to what we were talking about earlier, this ability of the powers that be, the people in power to shape the narrative, right? And so that is so clear. Their view of Black women as servants and the indignance. How dare you decide that you don't want to serve me? And so I will create this narrative and write about it in the press and talk about it and create a law, again, systemic oppression that will compel you where you have no choice. You've got to either be working or you're going to be fined or put in jail. But we're saying that enslavement ended when?
Right.
Right. Like, what exactly were your choices? And just thinking about how that hands down to us over time. And we should go back and revisit, our Humanity First sessions last year when we were talking about it, where people were asking why is it hard to rest? What were our models? Did we see our mothers and our grandmothers falling asleep on their feet? Were we told we were lazy if we weren't running around doing a million things? Like, it's just intense when you think like, wow, this is really just our history. We have never been able to rest and never been able to parent our children without the specter and the guise and the absolute oppression of whiteness and white supremacy at every step of the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's hurtful to process, to say, to think about people being fined for deciding, women being fined for saying, I can afford it. I'm staying home with my children. And the system saying, I will send you to jail. Come take care of mine. And so,
And then having remember, the idea of the stereotype of welfare queens, right? So that was like the 80s version of this, right? The reality though is like, what were the white moms doing? Were they working? Like, were they so this is the other thing when you think about, right, what does womanhood and how can you cannot talk about gender in a way that is not intersectional, because my reality is not the reality of a white woman. It never has and it never will be. So it's so deep. But listen, so here's the deal. It's 2021. And we love our young people from the infants on up, right? We love the millennials, the Gen Z. We like, because y'all are like, hold up, wait a minute. It really does not have to be this way. Because I said it doesn't have to be. So, all hail our Humanity First Crown MVP, who has the initials NO. Naomi Osaka. So Awesomely Lovey posted this and I live for it. Naomi of House Osaka, first of her name, tennis treasure, savant of singles, Grand Slam goddess, tycoon of talent, spokeswoman of self-care in a world that is constantly giving Black women hell. She refuses to sacrifice her well-being for a sport that does not want to prioritize her humanity. I have no choice but to hail her, because this is courage under pressure and grace when they try to disgrace her. We see you, Naomi. Shout out for choosing you. And this image of her staring directly at the camera, no smile, looking so fierce with her gold hoop earrings and her hair out and her bright red lipstick is just, this gave me life this week, honestly.
so we want to remind people that one of the reasons that we have Humanity First and that we meet is to say, yes, these are the narratives, but we have the opportunity to create a high vision for ourselves, and we have the opportunity to create new narratives for ourselves and new programming, and to unpack, why do I feel this way, and what are all these systems that I'm navigating through, and then commit to saying, this does not have to be my life. I can and will stand up, and I will raise my children. I will do this work. I will teach my children. I will rest. I will say no, that's not part of my job, or yes, that is part of my job and it affects me. And so this power of saying no, and this power of taking back and centering our humanity is absolutely necessary. And so this week we just had this huge influx of inspiration of thinking of this narrative that we have explored before on Humanity First. And that I'll say that at the beginning of 2020, or the 2020 pandemic, I feel like a lot of us were saying it. But now, as the world opens up and we are reinserted into the pressures in all of these systems, and we have in many ways said, there's a lot of meme culture, Instagram culture that talks about, yes, it's okay to live in luxury, or yes, it's okay to say no. And yes, and so there's a lot of talk and a lot of narratives about it. But at the same time, when we look at the mental health crisis, or when we look at the women around us, the people around us, and we really look at our lives, we're still spent, and we're doing a lot of the talking, and then but there's still this disconnect, because programming, it's hard to break. And rest is not just, let's just take fun pictures for Instagram. Rest is an act of resistance.
Mhm. And also there's the fact that when you say this is a perfect example, when you say, okay, I'm not just going to post about it, I'm not going to make a meme, I'm not just going to say it, but I'm going to do it, the system does not want you to. And so they will try to punish you and to force you into compliance, right? We just had two examples of Greenville, South Carolina, Black women raising their families. And then, of course, also, I don't want to erase her Asian identity as well. So she did this as a Black Asian woman, right? Which is revolutionary on both sides. So, so now what? She was like, the system is like, we're going to try to force you into compliance to not prioritize yourself. And she said, bet, I'm out.
Yeah,
Right.
and I mean, to this, in some ways, this is obviously she's a star and she's in a privileged position, but people were saying, oh, the sponsors are going to go away, and this is going to go away, and the endorsements are going to go away. And you have to understand, when you walk in a room, that you're the talent. When you're the talent. And she said, I'm going to let them go ahead and do that. And and it did not happen. And so a lot of the times we're scared, and we have to do it differently and in a small, more practical way, because this might not, we might not be the talent at work, or we might not be, but in many areas, rest is not just saying no to work or going and laying down on the couch. Rest is taking your PTO, rest is taking, you took some time to work on your health, Takima.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
rest is also our children. We have to say, I need this. I need you to help me co-parent to another parent. Or I need you, yes, you're my child, but I don't have to be accessible to you every single, I need to create a self-directed space for you, because as 5 years old or 4 years old, you should be able to do it. And I need to rest. Rest is telling your partner no on the day that I don't have the children, because you're running an errand with them. I am not going to clean. Rest comes in many forms.
Yep.
It's not just refusing work,
Mhm.
is creating narratives that allow you to say, I am resisting and I am resting from that labor, whether it is domestic, whether it is with our children. Rest, absolutely, Meredith. Rest is creating boundaries, whether it is with our friends, whether it is saying, I will not create content for my Instagram account when I am going through grief, because whether it's personal or collective. No, like for me, one of the things that I haven't done is, like, I haven't done reels on Instagram. And everybody's like, "Oh, you'll have more engagement." And I'm like, I don't do them. I am not adding to that, to my workload. That's not how I serve my parents. And I resist that trend, not because I don't think it's interesting, but because I am not adding it to my service mix. So rest can look like many different things, but we have to be able to do it.
Yeah. And I just want to like remind folks, like you said, obviously Naomi Osaka has a massive degree of privilege that many of us don't, right? But we are the talent in our own lives. Like we are. We really are. And at the end of the day, we're responsible to ourselves and our families. And I've been talking about this a lot. We have a lot of evidence of what happens to women of color when we do not prioritize ourselves and rest. We have tons of evidence, right? This year, if any, has shown us we are dying young. We are having massive health issues, physical health issues, mental health issues, emotional. We're not like living the lives we want to lead when we are constantly on the go and feeling like we're accountable to everybody all the time. So why not make some different choices? And at the end of the day, this could have been devastating for her career. It absolutely could have. But we also, have to step out on faith. And we also have to think about how are we living aligned in our purpose? Like that is what my work this year for me is living authentically aligned in my purpose. And so it helps me if I have to make decisions about things every time I go, is this authentically aligned with my purpose? And if it isn't, it might be a great opportunity or a great whatever outside, but I'm like, no, that's not going to work for
And
me.
even if it would have been devastating for her career, what she is saying that is she's essentially saying that the alternative is devastating for her,
Exactly.
right? And sometimes, and we are human, and we are worthy of that. We are worthy of our humanity, and we're here to claim it. And it's already 9 o'clock, and we have to go.
Sorry, I just looked at that. We've been trying to end a little early, but we
And we were to do a little. This was perfect. It was perfect the way that it was. But we really want to leave. We don't even have to do the announcements or anything like that. We want to leave with permission to rest, however rest looks like, and permission to say no, however and whatever that looks like. Because particularly for Black women on this call, that watch this recorded, or if your identity isn't one of Black as any other woman of color, and you say, I have my own history and my own truth, and it also shows me all of these other ways that historically I have not been allowed to rest. You go ahead and you claim that, right? Um, but our inability to rest and our inability to center our humanity has systemically been robbed of us, and it is violent. And so we leave with the permission to rest.
yes, absolutely. Rest, breathe, and through that, that is your resistance. Ashe. Thank you. And thank you for Beata and whoever else has been watching on YouTube. We have seen your comments. And thank you all for joining us on Zoom as well. We have lots of comments, lots of links that we will reshare on the YouTube channel. So thank you so much. Deep breaths, stretch your bodies, get outside. Remember your complicated house plant, house plant with complicated emotions.
All right. Have a
Thank
beautiful
you, everybody.
day.
Take care.